Hi everyone, it's Todd from Transform Philanthropy with another hopefully short video for you this morning. You know, the last video I did, I talked about the DAF ecosystem and the various components of that. And I think it's very, very important. And my plan was over the next series of videos was to go through that model component by component and really break it down for you. However, I'm feeling very strongly that I need to rush ahead a little bit and talk about something that I feel is very, very timely and is also critical. And this morning was the last straw. I've been hearing from my friends in the development space that times are tough. Donors are disappearing. Giving is down, or it feels like it's heading down, or people are talking about it going down. So times are tough. And then this morning I got up and over a coffee very early, I read through a newsletter that pertains to the property market in Canada. And for those of us who live in Vancouver, you're going to have to forgive our fixation on the price of property and the machinations of that industry. I'm reading through this and I was shocked to hear something like 60% of Canadian mortgages will be renewed over the next, call it 18 months. And that's significant. 40% of those renewals, those people can expect a small decrease in their payment, which is always great news. But the other 60 can expect an increase of 15 to 20% in their mortgage payment when they renew. And 10% of those folks can expect that increase to be more than 40%. And that to me is shocking. And as I said, that was kind of the last straw. And I thought that today we would talk about something that's farther down on my agenda, but critical, I believe, especially in these times. And that is the principle that donor advised fund grants are really, in a way, it's a recession-resistant revenue stream for your charity or nonprofit. And let me explain what I mean by that. In order to do that, however, I need to tell you a story. This goes back a couple of years when I was actually working for a donor advised fund. And I got a call from an advisor who I really liked and respected. And he had a couple of accounts with us that were very large. They were six-figure DAFs. And he called me up one day and he said, Mike, and he mentioned a particular client of his. And he said, you know, they love their DAF. They just are so happy with it. And they're doing all sorts of exciting things with it. And he was right. They were extremely active with their DAF. He said, but I got a call from their accountant. And he's just not clear on what this thing is, and he really needs to understand it. So I wonder if we can call a meeting, and you can come over and explain to the accountant what this thing is and why it's a benefit to his client. So I said, sure. So I went over. I brought with me a colleague of mine from the Donor Advised Fund who was a philanthropic advisor, and she was working with the client directly on their impact. And we got there, and the advisor was there, obviously, the client was there, the accountant was there, and the two of us from the DAF. And we sat down and I started to explain to the accountant in particular just what this thing was and why it was such an incredible tool and why he was an important part of the whole process, talking about DAF ecosystem. And partway through, he said, Mike, okay, stop talking. I think I understand what you're saying. Let me tell you what I think you just said. And he explained it to me, but he said, what I'm going to do is when it comes tax season, I'm going to sit down as I do every year and I do a very quick, rough calculation, come up with a number for our tax situation. And I'm going to say to you, and he pointed to the client, I'll go to you and say, listen, I really could use a $250,000 tax receipt just to make up a number. That'll really help mitigate your tax situation this year. And he pointed to the advisor and he said, your job is to choose the most appropriate securities in the portfolio to donate so that we maximize the capital gains benefit as well as the charitable benefit. And then he looked at my colleague and he said, now your job is to continue to work with the client so that she realizes the impact that she really wants to get here with this tool. And then he turned to me and he just kind of said, oh, I'm not sure why you're here, but that's okay. And then we carried on. I loved it. It was a fantastic meeting, and it really drove home the point about the donor advised fund that I knew in my head, but I hadn't been able to articulate up until this point. There really is very little correlation to the amount of money that goes into a DAF at any particular time and the amount of money that is granted out of the DAF at any particular time, and why you shouldn't worry about the money going into the donor advised fund as opposed to coming to you directly. And in fact, when you really understand it, you might actually encourage that kind of behavior. When is the best time for a donor to put money into their DAF? It's not when you ask them for a gift. It's when they need the tax receipt. And think about that for a moment. And we're talking about people who are givers. As I've said many times, this is not a tool that's going to turn a non-giver into a giver overnight automatically. That's just not going to happen. But these are folks who give away a lot of money consistently and regularly. And they, from time to time, encounter tax issues. And so this is the tool that they can use to mitigate that. So the time to fund my donor advised fund, your donor advised fund, is not when your favorite charity asks you for a grant, but when you need the tax receipt and your accountant comes calling, and then you've got something to give back to that accountant. What does that have to do with a DAF being a potential recession-resistant revenue stream? If you're talking to donors and they're saying to you, listen, I'm kind of worried. Quite honestly, the world's a mess. Have you seen the price of groceries lately? I'm worried about my job. These tariffs are causing problems. It's just not a great time. I love your organization. I love your mission. I just don't think that I can give you a gift at this point in time. I suspect some of you are starting to hear that. And these are people who love what you do. They're being honest. They love it and they wish they could support it, but they're just feeling nervous about the current environment. And I can't open my wallet and part with any of my wealth right now because I just might need it, because this is the ultimate rainy day that we're in the middle of. But think back to what I just said about funding my DAF. I put money into my donor advised fund yesterday, last month, 4 years ago, whatever the number is. It doesn't really matter how long ago. It was in the past. I've already dealt with the separation anxiety, if you will, of parting with some of my hard-earned money. It's gone. It's over here. I cannot have it back. It can only go to charity. And now we're having a conversation and you're asking me for a gift. I can give you a grant out of my donor advised fund. And listen carefully, this is a little bit of hyperbole, but it's actually true in a sense. I can give you a gift out of my donor advised fund, and it doesn't at least feel like it costs me a penny. Yeah. Isn't that the greatest thing in the world if you're in the fundraising world? I gave it away. It's gone. I put it aside. It's out of mind. It's certainly out of my bank account. And now I can give it to you, and I've been able to honor your work and support your mission as I've been doing all along. Even though I'm worried about the current state of the world, I have this pool that's available to give away, and I can give you some of it. And I've said in the past on LinkedIn or in various podcasts, I believe that the amount in Canada that's in the donor advised fund marketplace is actually bigger than we first suspected. I think it's of the order of $14 billion plus. So there's a lot of money out there waiting to come to you from people who can give it to you without feeling the pain of making that gift. And in these times in particular, I think that is unbelievably potent. So you got to be able to attract that. You need to be able to speak to it, speak to the donor advised fund, speak intelligently about it, and have those communications. So if you haven't got your head around that yet, now's the time. Don't hesitate, please, because this is something that is going to help you raise more money in an era. I'm afraid it's going to be an era, not just a couple of rough weeks, of increased difficulty in traditional fundraising. This is what we do at Transform Philanthropy. If you'd like to talk more about this, I'd be happy to engage in that conversation. Please reach out. I hope this is helpful. I hope it's encouraging. Thank you for your time, and I hope the rest of your day goes well.